Hello everyone, and welcome to the ASMR review show. We finally have it. Dune Part 2. Oh yeah, the spice must flow. And it is flowing alright. Yeah, boy. So, first of all, I have my camera and my ring light all set up to do like the tier videos, right? The tier list videos. And it's annoying and a hassle for me to take that down and switch it back, and I want to do more tier list videos, so I'm keeping it like this for now. So have some nice lovely photos and posters in the background, just so it's not a vertical video, so apologies for that. But I wasn't actually going to make a Dune Part 2 video. Why? Because, well, do you need me to tell you that this movie is awesome and I really love it? I feel like that should be pretty self-explanatory, especially because it's going up a review several weeks after the film came out, so I don't think many people want to, wait 2 weeks after a movie came out to see a review. But apparently there are some who are interested in that, so for all you people who wanted it, here we go. It's a Dune Part 2 video, and we got a nice big beer for this one. Super tall, hazy double IPA by Fieldhouse. Oh yeah. However, we will not just have Dune Part 2 content in this, because I'm filming this right after watching the Oscars, and we'll just do a quick little thing on that, because I did my tier list video and the hopes and predictions, and I even wrote out a predictions sheet to mark off while watching the Oscars. And turned out to be pretty good, I would say. You see on there, red is the category I hoped didn't win, blue is who I wanted to win, and green is who I thought would win. And, most of them I was pretty spot on. The only one I was off on is Anatomy of a Fall winning original screenplay. I would have been fine with any choice in that category, except for Maestro. And the one that caught me a little off guard was American Fiction winning adapted screenplay. I felt that was the least good out of all of those screenplays. So that was the only one I felt was an upset. I was hoping maybe Barbie would win it so Greta could get something. But I also thought it would be Oppenheimer. I thought Oppenheimer was going to run away with a lot of awards, and it did. But Poor Things got a couple in there, which I thought was quite nice, so that is good. And I'm really glad Zone of Interest won for Best Sound. That is good, a very important one. It was nice to see Boy and the Heron win Best Animated Feature, but I would have also been good with Spider-Verse, or even Nimona, I think was a good one. Poor Emma Stone. Emma Stone didn't think she would win and was hoping it would be Lily Gladstone. So I hope she doesn't get destroyed too much on Twitter. It's not like it's her fault. So I would have liked it to be Lily Gladstone. But, oh well, Emma Stone is, going to be the brunt of some jokes there, Poor thing. Other than that, yeah, no, it was pretty good. Again, I really only like to follow the Oscars if it's a good year for film, and it was a good year, and there were a lot of good choices. I think it's a little disappointing nothing went to Killers of the Flower Moon. I actually preferred that movie to Oppenheimer, but I also said Marty has won awards in the past. Christopher Nolan hadn't, so if, like I said with Oppenheimer, it was not my favorite movie of the year. It was not my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. I don't even know if it was the best 3-hour period piece drama, nor do I even know if it was the best World War II related movie, or best movie that happened to do with atomic disasters. But I'm okay with it, right? If Christopher Nolan won his stuff finally, that is good. And I liked how he didn't bother speaking during the Best Picture award because he already did his speech for Best Director, so he gave the other producers, which includes Emma Thomas, his wife, a chance to speak, so that is very nice. Yeah, so overall that's nice. Here's hoping that next year is also a good year. That's the big one. Dune Part 2. Right? Will we get back-to-back Best Picture winners where it's a 3-hour movie about a guy with blue eyes who has access to atomic weapons, also hooking up with Florence Pugh? Right? Will it happen? I don't know. It would be really nice if it did. Everyone seems to be convinced that Dune Part 2 will be the Best Picture winner, and I don't know. We'll see what happens this year. I'm not sure what else we can expect to see this year. It's a little too early to tell. But yeah, there we have it. Dune. So here's the big thing for me, is between watching Part 1 and Part 2, I read the book, which I had not done before. So this does affect my opinion of the movie a little bit, and it's interesting because I watched Part 1 not having read the book, so I watched it for what it was. But Part 2, I had to watch it thinking, this is different, this is not how it was, that part wasn't included. So that does affect my enjoyment of it a little bit, and I would like to see it again, going in knowing what is and what will not be included from the book. Also, I really liked the book a lot. It was very good, and I understand why it would be so difficult to adapt this book to a visual medium. There's so many bits of people talking in their heads and stuff, and I find it interesting that Princess Irulan essentially narrates the beginning of every chapter. They kind of did that in the film in a nice way, and they kind of compressed some things down to simplify things for narrative purposes, and I would say most of the changes they made were pretty good. It's I can't look at this film so much as an adaptation as it is its own thing, because my biggest complaint about Dune Part 2 is that I wanted more, but that was my same complaint with Part 1. And if your biggest complaint about a nice, delicious piece of cake is that you wish you could have a second piece of cake, well, you're not really saying it's a bad piece of cake, right? You just want more cake. It's delicious. Or more delicious beer, This is a good one. So, that being said, can I talk spoilers? I mean, well, let's keep it general, okay? It's good. I enjoy it, right? But my caveat is, if you didn't like Part 1, you probably won't like Part 2. I know a few people who Part 2 kind of swayed them over a little bit, so maybe. But, that's how I view it. I'm very biased to enjoy this type of film. A slow science fiction movie. Or a slow movie that takes place in the desert. I just recently watched, finally, Lawrence of Arabia, and that is a masterpiece of a film. But it's not for everybody, because it's a nearly 4-hour movie that takes place entirely in the desert. It's not going to be for everybody. Yeah. So, that's how I view it. If this looks like a movie you want to see, well, you should probably see it, and you probably already have. In which case, I think you're just here to hear me rant about Dune and what I think about it and fanboys, so let's get on with that. Yeah, spoilers ahead. One thing I noticed seemed to me, I don't know, it's a very beautifully shot movie, of course, it looks very great, but I feel like there were a lot more very extreme handheld close-ups in this one compared to the previous one. And I'm not sure if that was this movie being a little more of a COVID production, or if it was to make it so they didn't have to do as many visual effects and stuff. Because if the camera zoomed in on the actor and you can't see the background, you don't have to worry about making it look all sci-fi. But I kind of noticed that for a bit, and it was kind of throwing me off. I was like, am I watching Oppenheimer? Where they use fancy IMAX cameras just to show close-ups of people's faces? I don't know. But that is made up for by the fact that I feel like this movie has a lot more of a wide variety of a color palette. And specifically to do with Arrakis, because whenever we see Arrakis, it was either at night and stuff was kind of blue, or it was during the day and everything was very beige, you know, very washed out. So to get that opening scene with the eclipse and the sunset and it's all orange, that alone was already a more interesting color palette than most of part one. And this continues throughout the film. There's a much more wider variety of color, and we have the almost black and white segment on the Harkonnen planet Gidi Prime, which is great. I love the way they did the arena scene. I recall that being a lot more in-depth in the book, and this is funny because I'm trying to remember details of the book, but it's also difficult because I read the book when I was on all the train rides when I was on my honeymoon in Europe. So you'll forgive me if there were other things on my mind at the time than just reading a sci-fi book than it was seeing Italy, Switzerland, and France. Oh my gosh. But like I know one character who's not in it is a Count Fenring, Lord Fenring, and I remember him in the book, but I'm having trouble remembering exactly what he does, but I think he was to be played by Tim Blake Nelson, and his scenes were cut. Also, there's no Thufir Hawat either. He's just not in the movie, and I know he was in the book later on, because there's a whole big thing about him and Gurney being convinced that Lady Jessica was the traitor, not Yue, and they don't believe it's him. And I feel like that's kind of a missed opportunity, but then maybe he had scenes and they were cut out. I'm not sure. So there's that. Another big change is that Alia is never born. Lady Jessica's daughter, Paul's sister. She's born in the book and in the David Lynch movie. And it's very weird. So here she's never born. She just kind of talks to her through her thoughts because she becomes like hyper intelligent because Jessica drinks the water of life. And we do have a nice cameo where we see the future grown up Alia played by Anya Taylor-Joy. That's very nice. And then also Paul is supposed to have a son. I don't know if that son was with Chani or not, or with this other thing, because the other character who's not in it is Jamis has a wife, and it's kind of like a thing where when they get to the siege, that like because he killed Jamis in battle, that now he's supposed to take her as his wife. And I remember he's kind of into it, but also he knows he has to, but not because at the time he has the hots for Chani. So if I'm remembering some of this wrong, you can let me know. I'm doing my best to recall. It's been a while since I read the book, and a lot has happened since then. Or another detail I like, it's they got it across in the film, but it's that Paul cries during Jonas's funeral, and typically that would be like a no-no thing, like do not waste your water for the dead. But because he does this, look at the look at Muad'Dib, the Mahdi is so generous, he gives water to the dead. But the funny thing is, and I love that people are coming to this realization, is I made a joke about how the next movie was going to be Life of Brian, essentially, right? Everyone else would be going, he is the Messiah, hail the Messiah. And Lady Jessica would be in the back going, oh no, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. And then there is literally a scene from Life of Brian pretty much in this movie, right? He says, oh no, I'm not the Messiah, I'm not the Mahdi. You see how humble he is? Only the Mahdi would be so humble and not so proud. And at that point I turned to my wife and we both said to each other, only the true Messiah denies his divinity. What sort of logic is that? Oh, I love it. And I've seen people do that. They post that scene now as Dune Part 2 spoilers with no context. It's great. I also love how, maybe this is just my algorithm speaking to me properly, but seems to me a lot more people are into Dune Part 2 and like the world and the style, because I was all over it when Part 1 came out, but I feel like it didn't really seem to hit the general public. And I understand we were entering the second year of a pandemic. Not every movie was getting big wide releases. Not everyone was going to see it in the theaters. They were waiting until it was on streaming. So it's nice to see. I feel like it's really hitting hard, and people know it's a big thing, and so they're making content about it. They're into the cosplays more. They're into the style. I like that a lot. I'm seeing people just go crazy, and the movie's barely been out a week. People are already ordering chain mail so they can do Princess Irulan cosplays, or coming up with weird, creepy Harkonnen-inspired outfits from the Harkonnen Giddy Prime scene. Yeah, so I like that a lot. It's cool. I'm really hoping that this movie does get like a big following, like Lord of the Rings film franchise style. I mean, I know it already has fans, of course. It's a long-running, very influential science fiction book series. But, I think about people who are specifically like Lord of the Rings movie fans, right? They haven't read the books. They just like the movies, and it's very inspirational. And so it would be cool to see Dune reach that status in terms of the films, not necessarily the books, right? So that's pretty good. So Paul's son, Leto II, is not in it. And I think in the book he dies as well, which is weird because I don't know much about what happens in the Dune sequel books. I'm going to give you the extent of my knowledge. Okay, here's all I know. That the jihad, as it's referred to in the books, the holy war or crusade in the films, continues and leaves billions dead, and his son turns into a sandworm. And Duncan, Idaho apparently is everywhere somehow, even though he died. I recall talking to a friend of mine who said something like he comes back as a cyborg, or maybe like one of those brains in a jar, like Futurama style. Because the whole thing is that as a human, he was like a very, very handsome guy, and then he's all disfigured and stuff later. But again, don't quote me on that. And who knows if future movies are going to do that. I know that Denis Villeneuve is hoping to do Dune Messiah as a film. I actually have that book. I have it now, but I've not read it yet. So please no spoilers on that. Again, this is the extent of my knowledge. And I really liked the way Part 2 ended, because reading the book, I felt it had a very abrupt ending. And not like just an abrupt ending, but more like, think about the way chapters in books end, they just sort of stop and then there's the next chapter, right? It's like a nice place to pause before you go on to the next page. That's how it felt. Because it's Lady Jessica consoling Chani over, hey, look, I know you're essentially getting dumped because he wants to get with someone of political power, but don't worry, it'll all be good in the end. And I think they reflected this nicely with having Chani to run away to be off on the sandworm. That was a good choice for an ending, I think. But also they made it more clear that, oh yeah, the Holy War is starting and she's gonna get fucked, basically, So I feel like that was better communicated in this movie as it was opposed to the book, perhaps. So I like that. And it was also just nice to have this movie as a counterpoint to the 84 Dune, to actually see a film properly go into lengths about this part of the story rather than montaging through half of it, like what the 84 Dune had to do, because they had to condense this whole book into barely 2 hours, 10 minutes. So I liked that a lot. The cast is great and the action is great. I like how Dune is like yeah, there's lasers and there's explosions and there's shields and hovercraft and death and destruction and all that, but it's not really what you're there for, you know? Like, all of that's there and the scale is epic, but it's not just about that. It's not really Lord of the Rings in space. It's kind of a Game of Thrones in space, at least my understanding of Game of Thrones, which I've not actually seen. But I know that Game of Thrones is about different houses in this land fighting for control of the power thing. And that's the essence of Dune. And I really, though, love how they managed to keep this theme of, the reluctant messiah and the anti-white savior story going through. It was sorely lacking in the 84 Dune. And having not read the book, I knew that was a crucial element of it that got left out. They basically made him Space Jesus in the 84 Dune. So it was nice that part 1 started setting up those elements and that part 2 carried on those elements, He knows what will happen as a result of his actions, but feels like he has no choice, that is the best course of action, but also the worst course. So I really liked that they kept that in the film. That's very important. I mean, there's already been a lot of talk about the media literacy concept now between Dune, White Savior stories, and also, of course, Starship Troopers and Helldivers 2. It's not a game I plan on playing, but I do love Starship Troopers, and it was hilarious to see, people trying to paint us as, if you think the movie's a propaganda film, then you would have sided with the bugs. Like, no, this ain't it. That ain't it, Chief. Yeah, and I rewatched Starship Troopers recently. That's a fun movie. I love it. Very great indeed. Speaking of sci-fi, I went and saw Voivod again, because it was my birthday the other week. I'm now 30, a big 3-0. What better way to celebrate that than by seeing a Voivod concert, one of my favorite bands. And I met another fan there. That was cool. I talked about in my last video. I met a fan at Fan Expo. Met another fan at Voivod show. Apparently I'm popular now, so that's awesome. And it's always good to meet people who know my stuff, because I don't know if I'm actually doing a good job with these videos and these contents that I make. So, if I meet people and they say that I'm doing good and people leave good comments, then I guess I'm doing good. I mean, that's the weird thing about making your own ASMR videos, is like, I feel like ASMR, it's almost like you can't tickle yourself, right? Because it's happening. Much like how I can't get ASMR from my own videos, because I know what I'm gonna say, and it's my own voice, so it's just odd. I never experienced that from my own voice or my own sounds, so I don't know if it's actually good and that people like it. So every time you leave me a nice comment like that, I appreciate that, because apparently I was doing something right. And really, this is all just an excuse to me to justify ranting about nerdy stuff that I like, right? So yeah, what else can we talk about Dune Part 2? Yeah, for me at least, it also moved very fast. By the time we got to the big end battle, I was like, wait, this is the big end battle? That means we're in the third act. That means the movie's almost over. No. So I think when I rewatch it, maybe at home, I'll notice the length a little more. I did feel that way about Part 1. Part 1 was nearly 2.5 hours, and it didn't feel that way on the first watch in the theater, but it did when watching it at home. So I'm guessing Part 2 will be that way as well. I'll notice the length a little more on a rewatch. But yeah, performances are all great. Everyone's great. Looks great. Sounds great. I would have been really interested to see how the Oscars went this year. If Dune Part 2 had come out, perhaps it would have stolen some stuff from Oppenheimer and Poor Things. But is it going to be a big Oscars winner this year? I don't think so. It it came out in March, quite early in the year. And as we've seen, very technically well-shot movies that come out in March can sometimes nab a few nominations, but I don't think they're going to win, because last year we had John Wick 4, which I think deserved some tech recognition. It was nice that they got that stunts montage, but I think it deserved a little more than that. And the previous year we had The Batman, which was up for a couple of awards, but didn't win. Though, to be fair, what did win? Well, Avatar, Top Gun Maverick, All Quiet on the Western Front. Also pretty good choices, I would say. So that's how it is. It's tough competition in those things sometimes. Yeah. I don't know. What else is there to say? I mean, I went and listened to that Iron Maiden song, To Tame a Land, a lot, because it's a great song, and it's about Dune, and that's good. Yeah. I don't know. Like, this is why I wasn't necessarily planning on doing a Dune Part 2 review, because it's just, like, it's more of Part 1, and it's good, and I like it. Yeah, I guess that's the only thing. It's weird. It's a similar thing I actually feel about Lord of the Rings. Despite Lord of the Rings being a giant, super big, epic thing, I feel like there's a lot that gets left out. And it's like very basic stuff that I think should have been included, but isn't. Like how magic and like power levels work in Lord of the Rings, right? We know that Gandalf is a wizard, but it's never really established, oh, yeah, he was, like, sent back by God. It's kind of there in the extended version about how he's supposed to be the wizard that Sauron was supposed to be. But, like, staffs breaking, the Witch King breaking his staff, and him not being allowed to fully use magic in the War of the Ring to help the humans, you know, little things like that. It's just kind of stuff you roll with. You don't really question it. And I feel that same way about Dune Part 2, right? We never see these guild navigators. I mean, in David Lynch's Dune, they're like weird giant monsters. But that is a little more accurate to the book. That was the other thing, I guess I can kind of talk about Dune Part 1 versus book Part 1. I was actually really surprised by how much of what I know as, like, iconic, well-known, infamous Dune imagery is actually not even in the book. Like the big travel sequence from Caladan to Arrakis. It's not in the book. It actually took me by surprise. 1 minute, Paul's having a conversation with the Duke on a beach, and then the next scene, Lady Jessica's picking out wallpaper for the new house. Like, there's no big transition, which I know it's kind of funny. I was thinking about how Part 1 kind of did the transition less, whereas it's a big sequence in 84 Dune, but it's actually more book accurate, apparently. And you only really get that little glimpse of the Highliner and the space travel in Part 1, where you can see, like, through the Highliner there's another planet, but you don't see it outside of the Highliner, thus establishing that it's actually operating like some kind of a wormhole, folding time and space. We don't really get much of that in this one here. So we don't get guild stage navigators, and we don't get more about why spice is so important, and we don't get more mentats, right? Like, Fighter de Reese is already dead at this point. Most of his big scenes that were in the book are cut, and there's no Thufir Hawat. And they also don't establish why mentats exist. This was a cool thing I found. So I guess in Dune universe there was the it's got a name for it. There's a fancy name for it, and I don't recall it. But essentially, the Dune universe had like a big giant AI robot rebellion uprising, where computers and AI tried to take over and destroy everyone. Very precedent for our times with all the AI stuff coming out. Wonderful. So essentially there's a ban on all computers and all AI, kind of Mass Effect style, how you're not allowed to do AI, but they still do anyway. And I don't know if that's a thing like in Dune, where it's like you're not supposed to, but someone secretly does, and they have like a Evie Edie from Mass Effect situation. But because of that, that's why mentats exist. They are humans that have been trained in this planet to become essentially human computers and do calculations at the blink of an eye, just like 3,174 billion Solaris. So that's really cool. I like this concept of mentats. But again, not really touched upon in the film. And I guess that kind of highlights it. Like, if Dune needed to be done properly, I guess it would have to be like some kind of limited series, but it would also need to have the budget of what Dune, the movie, has, you know, and it couldn't be too meandering, right? Like, I wouldn't want it to be a meandering TV show. So I guess this is just further establishing truly how monumental of a task filming Dune is, which is why it's been so difficult over the years. You know, we had the failed Alexandro Jodorowsky. I know his last name's Jodorowsky. Jodorowsky's Dune, which was never fully realized, right? Of course, as I previously said, we have that film's failure to thank for the creation of Alien, because H.R. Giger was brought on to do designs for the Harkonnen homeworld, something which I'm very glad to see has like persisted throughout all the filmed adaptations. Like, he didn't actually fully design the Harkonnen homeworld and was credited for it, but like they're just like, or it's just canon. That's canon. It's in the lore that all Harkonnen stuff is H.R. Giger inspired, so that's very good. But that was where Dan O'Bannon, the writer of Alien, met H.R. Giger and saw his artwork, the picture Necronom 4, thus deciding, hey, you've got to design this Star Beast concept that I'm coming up with. So yeah, Dune's influenced Star Wars and Alien, and Dune was inspired by a lot of other works, but I feel like the 60s Lawrence of Arabia film had a huge impact on that. So that's really good too. Really like that. I also like how it was established more that the water of life is obtained from like the glands of baby sandworms. That's pretty cool. Yeah. And I guess the main thing, what I wanted from this film, was if it couldn't be a one-to-one adaptation of the book, which I knew it wouldn't be, was that Dune Part 1, everyone was complaining that this is like 1/3 of the first Lord of the Rings movie. That is wrong. And I said this before. Dune Part 1 is the Godfather 1. That's what it is. There is rival houses competing over influence, and a older, wiser male authority figure who does his best to bring peace but ultimately is killed by his rivals. Thus, his inexperienced young son has to rise up and take control of his father's empire for what ultimately should be the greater good. But we know he's going down a dark path that will change him and his character forever. That's The Godfather. That's Dune Part 1, right? So, I wanted Dune Part 2 to be The Godfather Part 2. And it actually works quite well in that way. It's not as much of a half sequel, half prequel as Godfather Part 2, though we do get origins for Fade Rauza, so that is cool. I like that. But it is a Godfather Part 2 in that it is bigger and more expansive than Part 1, and we see him going further down that dark path and making questionable decisions, especially regarding his relationship, where you're like, I don't know if I like you anymore, right? So, yeah, that is very good. I like that a lot. That's what I wanted, and that's what I got. So for me, I am incredibly biased to love Dune Part 2. But again, is that wrong? Like, if I admit, yeah, this is a movie that was made for me, it's by a filmmaker who I love every one of his films, in a universe I love, with great score and all that stuff. Like, is it wrong to admit that and acknowledge that? I don't think so. That's just how it is. So, yeah, that's that. The spice is flowing, indeed. It'd be nice if we got Dune Messiah, but I would understand if Denis Villeneuve wants to take a break. He's been making science fiction films now for getting close to 10 years. And maybe he'll finally get us that Rendezvous with Rama film. Just saying. I know he's talked about it, and Morgan Freeman has. Get me the Rendezvous with Rama film, okay? I loved that book growing up. It was so good and so interesting. And Christopher Nolan, I know you've seen Rendezvous with Rama because you put the spaceship from it at the end of Interstellar, right? But if he wants to do something other than sci-fi, I'd be fine with that. I really liked Enemy. That was such a cool, weird psychological thriller. If I met David Lynch, I would say, hey, I know you hate Dune, and I know you're not going to watch the new Dune, but if you know this Denis Villeneuve guy, you should really check out that movie, Enemy. I think you, with your psychological thrillers movies, you'll really appreciate the style of that one. And it has giant spiders, which apparently weren't even CG. That spider at the end of Enemy was like a composite shot, where it was filmed in a little set and then composited to make it look like it was the same size. That's really cool. I like that, even if I don't. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Dune Part 2. Again, I hope this is the video you were waiting for, because I didn't know really what to say other than, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. But yeah, I think that highlights why it's good, but I have a few issues, but mainly to do with comparing it to the book. And you can't do that too much. You gotta watch it for what it is, and ultimately, were the changes that were made, did they dampen my experience of the film? Well, no, they didn't. It was just things I noticed that were different. It was kind of fun to be in on the conversation this time, because when I saw Dune Part 1, everyone was talking about, why didn't they put the dinner scene in? What dinner scene? I don't know. And now I've read the book, I understand the dinner scene. Yeah, that would have been really cool to see. I would have liked that. But alas, that's how it is. So yeah, unless something really good comes out, this is probably just going to be my number one movie of the year, because it's me, and that's how I am. So, bit anticlimactic, really, and the best movie of the year has already come out. But we'll see. What else do we have coming out? Joker Part 2. Francis Ford Coppola movie again. Megapolis. Okay. Is that Bong Joon-ho Mickey 17 movie coming out? I mean, everyone's hyped for that, but I don't think Parasite's the greatest movie ever. I think it's a pretty good movie, but so I don't know about that. The main thing I'm hyped for is Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection. Hell yeah. You remember Star Wars Battlefront? That was such a fun game. I played that all the time, man. Christmas Day 2005. Spent the entire day playing that game. Oh man, good times. Anyway, yeah, that's that. I guess we're just going to essentially just kill time and chill until we get Elden Ring Shadows of the Ur Tree, which we know when it's coming out, so we'll see y'all then. Anyway, I think that's about all I have to say. We'll wrap that up now. So, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good night. The spice must flow.